My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 28 years old, and 3 months ago, I received a text message that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. It came through our family group chat. You know, the one where we shared birthday wishes and dinner plans. But this message was different. We need space from you. Don't contact us again. Sent by my own parents. No explanation, no warning, just complete abandonment from the people who raised me. What I discovered next would expose a web of lies, financial betrayal, and manipulation that had been brewing for years, ultimately leading to the most satisfying revenge I never saw coming. Before we dive into this wild family drama, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? If you're here for stories about family betrayal and sweet justice, you're going to love what unfolds next. Hit that like button if you've ever felt blindsided by family, and don't forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma served my parents exactly what they deserved. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Growing up, everyone always told me how lucky I was to have such devoted parents. Mom and Dad seemed like the perfect couple. Married for 32 years, successful in their respective careers and always presenting this united front. Dad worked as a financial advisor while Mom ran a small but profitable interior design business. They lived in a beautiful colonial house in suburban Connecticut, the kind with perfectly manicured lawns and flower boxes that screamed American dream achieved. I was their only child, something they always said made me extra special. They invested everything in my education, from private tutoring to dance lessons to eventually helping me through college. Sure, they could be controlling sometimes, always wanting to know where I was, who I was with, what my plans were. But I chalked it up to them caring about me. They'd say things like, "We sacrificed so much for you, Rebecca," or, "Family comes first, always remember that." I bought into it completely. After graduating with a degree in marketing, I moved to Boston for work but maintained close contact. Weekly family dinners, holiday traditions, constant texting in our group chat called the Martinez Trio. I thought we were incredibly close. I shared everything with them. My relationships, career struggles, financial concerns, dreams for the future. They seemed genuinely invested in my life, always offering advice and support. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. There were red flags I completely missed, like how they always steered conversations away from their own lives, particularly their finances. When I'd ask about retirement plans or vacation funding, they'd deflect with comments about boring adult stuff or, "Don't worry about us, focus on your own future." They also had this weird habit of asking detailed questions about my salary savings account and investment portfolio. At the time, I thought they were just being caring parents who wanted to ensure I was financially secure. The truth was, they were gathering intelligence for something much more sinister. They'd created this elaborate performance of being the perfect supportive parents while systematically planning something that would devastate me in ways I never imagined. Every family dinner, every loving text message, every piece of advice they gave me was part of a carefully orchestrated deception that had been building for years. But I had no idea what was coming. In my mind, we were the closest family possible, bound by unconditional love and unwavering loyalty. I trusted them with every secret, every vulnerability, every hope and fear I had. They were my safety net, my biggest cheerleaders, my foundation, or so I thought. The irony is that while I was building my independent life in Boston, working 60-hour weeks and saving every penny to eventually buy my own place, they were already making plans that would turn my world upside down. Plans that involved my grandmother's inheritance, my college fund leftovers, and a level of betrayal that still takes my breath away when I think about it. Christmas 2023 was the last normal holiday we shared, though I didn't know it at the time. We followed our usual traditions: Mom's famous prime rib dinner, Dad's terrible Christmas jokes, exchanging thoughtful gifts by the fireplace. I gave them a beautiful photo album filled with family memories from the past year, and they seemed genuinely touched. They gave me expensive jewelry and talked about how proud they were of my accomplishments. But even then, there were subtle signs something was shifting. They asked more questions than usual about my finances, my future plans, my thoughts on family responsibility. They brought up stories about other families they knew, where children had forgotten their roots after achieving success. At the time, I thought they were just feeling sentimental about me, growing up and moving away. What I didn't realize was that they were already laying the groundwork for the manipulation campaign that would begin just a few months later. Every emotional conversation, every guilt trip about family loyalty, every reminder of their sacrifices was being carefully calculated to prepare me for what they had planned. The foundation of trust they'd spent 28 years building was about to become the weapon they'd use to destroy me financially and emotionally. And I walked right into their trap, with my eyes wide open, believing that family meant everything, and that parents would never deliberately hurt their children. The first crack in our family foundation appeared 6 months before that devastating text message. My maternal grandmother, Nana Rose, passed away at 87 after a brief illness. She'd been the matriarch of our family, a strong-willed woman who'd built a successful catering business from nothing, and accumulated significant wealth over her lifetime. I'd always been her favorite grandchild. She used to joke that I inherited her entrepreneurial spirit and stubborn streak. At the reading of Nana's will, I was shocked to discover she'd left me a substantial inheritance. $180, 0 inches cash, plus her vintage jewelry collection valued at around $50, 000. But here's where things got weird. My parents seemed genuinely surprised and upset by this development. They kept exchanging these strange looks during the lawyer's presentation, and afterward, they immediately started pressuring me about what I planned to do with the money. "You know, Rebecca, that's a lot of responsibility for someone your age," Dad said as we drove home from the lawyer's office. "Maybe we should help you invest it properly. You don't want to make any foolish decisions." Mom chimed in with her usual passive-aggressive approach. Nana always was impulsive with money. She probably didn't think through how overwhelming this would be for you. "We could help manage it until you're more settled in life." I found their reaction odd because they'd always encouraged my financial independence. Why were they suddenly treating me like I couldn't handle money responsibly? I politely declined their offers to help and instead consulted with a financial advisor I'd researched myself. The inheritance went into a separate high-yield savings account while I decided on long-term investment strategies. That's when the subtle manipulation began ramping up. My parents started making comments about how money changes people, how inheritances often tear families apart, how they hoped I wouldn't become one of those entitled young people who forget where they came from. They'd bring up stories of other families destroyed by sudden wealth, always with pointed looks in my direction. The pressure intensified when they started having financial difficulties. Suddenly, their successful careers weren't providing enough income. Dad mentioned some bad investments. Mom talked about losing clients due to economic downturns. They never directly asked me for money, but they'd make comments like, "We might have to sell the house," or "Retirement is looking impossible now," whenever I was around. I felt terrible for them and offered to help multiple times. Each time they'd refuse with martyr-like dignity, saying things like, "We could never take money from our daughter," or "That inheritance is for your future, not ours." But their emotional manipulation was relentless. They'd sigh heavily when looking at bills, make comments about eating ramen for dinner, or mention how they might have to cancel their health insurance. Meanwhile, I was living in a tiny studio apartment in Boston, taking public transportation everywhere and eating home-cooked meals to save money. But somehow I felt guilty about having this inheritance while my parents were supposedly struggling. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Here I was, their successful daughter with a good job and savings, feeling bad about financial security while they painted themselves as victims of circumstance. What I didn't know was that every conversation was being carefully calculated. Every guilt trip, every financial sob story, every manipulation tactic was designed to soften me up for what they were really planning. They weren't having financial difficulties at all. They were setting the stage for the biggest betrayal of my life. The psychological warfare intensified over the following weeks. They'd call me with updates about their worsening financial situation, always prefaced with apologies for burdening me with their problems. Dad would mention having to choose between groceries and medication, while Mom talked about canceling medical appointments because they couldn't afford the copays. They painted such a convincing picture of financial desperation that I started losing sleep worrying about them. Here were the people who'd sacrificed everything for my education and success, potentially losing their home and health coverage, while I sat on a substantial inheritance. The guilt was eating me alive exactly as they'd planned. But they were careful never to ask directly for help. Instead, they'd make statements like, "We just have to trust that everything will work out somehow," or "We've always managed before, we'll figure something out." They knew that directly asking for money might trigger my suspicion, so they opted for emotional manipulation that would make me offer the help myself. Looking back, I can see how expertly they orchestrated every conversation, every sob story, every guilt trip. They knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel responsible for their supposed suffering. They'd raised me to be generous and family-oriented, and now they were weaponizing those values against me. The setup was almost complete. All they needed was one final push to get me to offer them my inheritance money, and they knew exactly how to make that happen. The manipulation reached its peak during Thanksgiving dinner about 4 months before the text message that would change everything. I'd driven down from Boston, excited to spend the holiday with family and share some good news about a promotion I'd recently received. The house looked as beautiful as always. Mom had prepared her famous turkey with all the traditional sides, and Dad had opened a bottle of expensive wine to celebrate my career advancement. But something felt off from the moment I walked in. There was a tension in the air, like they were both performing, rather than genuinely enjoying our time together. They asked the usual questions about my job, my salary increase, my future plans, but with an intensity that felt different from normal parental curiosity. When I mentioned I was considering using part of my inheritance as a down payment on a condo, both their faces fell dramatically. "Oh honey, that seems so permanent," Mom said, her voice dripping with concern. "What if you need that money for an emergency? What if something happens to us and we need your help?" Dad nodded gravely. "Your mother's right. Real estate is such a gamble right now. Maybe you should keep that inheritance liquid just in case." The conversation shifted to their own financial situation, and this time they painted an even bleaker picture than before. Dad claimed his investment firm was facing a potential lawsuit that could wipe out their savings. Mom said her business was hemorrhaging money due to supply chain issues and client cancellations. They'd been seeing a financial advisor who suggested some aggressive strategies to avoid losing everything, but they needed liquid capital to make it work. "We would never ask you to sacrifice your future for us," Mom said, tears actually forming in her eyes. "But if something happened to us, you'd inherit nothing anyway. At least this way, we could all secure our futures together." They weren't asking me to give them the money, they were asking me to loan it to them. Just temporarily, they assured me. They'd pay me back with interest within 2 years, once Dad's legal issues were resolved and Mom's business recovered. They even offered to put together official loan documents through their lawyer to make everything legitimate and binding. I was torn. On one hand, these were my parents who'd sacrificed so much for my education and upbringing. On the other hand, something felt wrong about the whole situation. But their emotional manipulation was relentless. They spent the entire weekend sharing memories of all the things they'd done for me, all the money they'd spent on my childhood, all the sacrifices they'd made for my success. "Remember when we took out that second mortgage to pay for your college?" Dad asked pointedly. "We never hesitated because family takes care of family." The guilt was overwhelming. Here I was sitting on nearly $200,000, while my parents were supposedly facing financial ruin. What kind of daughter would I be if I let them lose everything when I had the power to help? Against my better judgment, I agreed to loan them $150,000, keeping $30,000 for myself as an emergency fund. The loan documents were prepared quickly, suspiciously quickly, actually. Their lawyer had everything ready within a week, as if they'd been preparing for this outcome all along. The papers looked official with proper interest rates and repayment schedules, but I was too trusting to scrutinize the details carefully. I signed everything they put in front of me, transferred the money to their account, and felt good about helping my family through a difficult time. That was my first mistake. The second was believing their promises about repayment. The third was not realizing that everything, from Nana's inheritance, to their financial crisis, to my own generous nature, had been part of an elaborate setup designed to separate me from my inheritance money. The relief and gratitude they showed after receiving the money seemed genuine at the time. They hugged me tearfully, thanked me repeatedly, and promised they'd never forget what I'd done for them. Dad even said he was proud to have raised such a generous and loving daughter. Mom talked about how this proved our family bond was stronger than any financial difficulty. For a brief moment, I felt good about my decision. I'd helped my parents through a crisis, demonstrated my love and loyalty, and secured their financial future. The loan documents gave me legal protection, and their promises of repayment with interest meant I wasn't really losing anything long term. But even as I drove back to Boston that weekend, something nagged at me. The whole situation had felt rushed and orchestrated in a way that didn't quite make sense. Why had their financial crisis suddenly become so urgent? Why were they only now telling me about these serious problems? And why had their lawyer been able to prepare complex loan documents so quickly? I pushed these doubts aside, telling myself I was being paranoid and that my parents deserved the benefit of the doubt. They'd never given me reason not to trust them before, and this was clearly just a temporary setback that would be resolved once their business situations improved. Looking back, I can see how perfectly they'd executed their plan. They'd conditioned me over months to feel guilty about having money while they struggled. They'd timed their request perfectly during a holiday when family loyalty and gratitude were already on my mind. They'd structured it as a loan rather than a gift, to make it seem more reasonable and legitimate. Most importantly, they'd used my own love and generosity against me. They knew I couldn't stand the thought of my parents suffering when I had the power to help them. They'd raised me to value family above everything else, and now they were exploiting those values to steal from me. The trap was perfectly set, and I'd walked right into it with my eyes wide open. But their celebration was premature. They had no idea that their own arrogance and greed would soon expose them completely. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking this sounds too calculated to be real, but trust me, the evidence I'm about to share will shock you even more than it shocked me. The level of planning and manipulation they put into this scheme would make professional con artists jealous. Stick around, because what I discovered next will completely change how you think about family loyalty and trust. For the first few months after lending them the money, everything seemed normal. My parents were appropriately grateful, constantly thanking me for saving the family and assuring me that repayment was on track. They even invited me to more family dinners than usual, treating me like a hero who'd rescued them from disaster. I felt good about my decision and proud that I could help when they needed it most. But then, small things started bothering me. During one of our family dinners in February, I noticed they'd renovated their kitchen with expensive new appliances and granite countertops. When I asked about it, they claimed it was a necessary investment to increase the house's value before the potential forced sale. That seemed reasonable, but something nagged at me about spending money on renovations during a financial crisis. A few weeks later, I was visiting and saw vacation brochures for European river cruises scattered on their coffee table. When I asked about them, Mom quickly shuffled them away and said they were just dreaming about better times ahead. But I'd seen the booking confirmations underneath. They'd already paid deposits for a 3-week cruise scheduled for this summer. The final straw came in March, when I drove past their country club and saw Dad's car in the parking lot. I knew they'd supposedly canceled their membership due to financial constraints, so seeing him there confused me. I called him later to ask about it, and he claimed he was just meeting a client there. But when I checked the club's website that evening, I discovered they'd actually upgraded to a premium membership level that cost significantly more than their previous plan. Something was very wrong. I started paying closer attention to their lifestyle and noticed they weren't living like people in financial crisis. Their spending habits hadn't changed at all. If anything, they seemed to be living more lavishly than before. Mom was carrying a new designer handbag, Dad had bought a luxury watch, and they were talking about replacing their perfectly good cars with newer models. I decided to do some investigating. Using my marketing skills and some online research tools, I started digging into their actual financial situation. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Dad's investment firm wasn't facing any lawsuit. I couldn't find any legal documents or news articles about pending litigation. Mom's interior design business was actually thriving. Her Instagram account was full of recent high-end projects and client testimonials. But the most devastating discovery came when I checked property records for their house. Not only were they not in danger of losing it, but they'd taken out a significant home equity loan just 2 weeks after I'd given them my inheritance money. They'd borrowed against the house's value, while simultaneously convincing me they were about to lose it. The pieces started falling into place. They'd orchestrated the entire financial crisis story to manipulate me into giving them my inheritance. They'd used my love for them, my gratitude for their sacrifices, and my natural generosity against me in the most calculated way possible. The loan documents I'd signed weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Their lawyer was probably in on the scheme. I felt physically sick as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. They'd planned this from the moment they learned about Nana's will. Every conversation about my inheritance, every guilt trip about family loyalty, every sob story about their finances had been part of an elaborate con game designed to steal from their own daughter. The worst part was realizing how long they'd been planning this. Those weird questions about my salary and savings weren't parental concern. They were intelligence gathering to figure out exactly how much they could reasonably expect me to loan them. The emotional manipulation had been going on for months, carefully conditioning me to feel guilty about having money while they pretended to struggle. I was furious, heartbroken, and completely disillusioned. The parents I'd trusted with my life had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They'd stolen my inheritance, money that my grandmother had specifically wanted me to have, and used my own love against me to do it. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. If they wanted to play dirty games with family money, I was about to show them exactly what happens when you mess with someone who has nothing left to lose. The depth of their deception became clearer as I continued investigating. I discovered they'd been researching inheritance law and financial manipulation techniques for months before Nana's death. They'd consulted with multiple lawyers about hypothetical scenarios involving family loans and inheritance disputes. They'd even practiced their sob stories, fine-tuning the emotional manipulation tactics they'd use on me. Most disturbing of all, I found evidence that they'd tried to influence Nana's will before her death. They'd visited her repeatedly in her final months, suggesting she should leave her money to them instead of me, because they could manage it better and ensure Rebecca's future more responsibly. When Nana refused and told them she wanted me to have financial independence, they'd started planning their theft immediately. They'd calculated everything down to the smallest detail. They knew exactly how much guilt and emotional pressure it would take to make me offer help. They'd researched my salary and living expenses to determine how much I could afford to loan them. They'd even timed their request perfectly to coincide with my career success, knowing I'd be feeling generous and grateful for their support. The betrayal went beyond just the money. They'd violated every principle they'd taught me about family loyalty and trust. They'd spent my entire life building a relationship based on love and mutual respect, only to reveal it was all a performance designed to position themselves for this ultimate theft. But their biggest mistake was underestimating me. They thought I was just a naive, trusting daughter who would never fight back against her own parents. They were about to learn that stealing from someone changes the rules of engagement completely. My first instinct was to confront them immediately, to scream and demand my money back and tell them exactly what I thought of their betrayal. But I realized that would be a mistake. If I was going to expose what they'd done and get my inheritance back, I needed solid evidence and a carefully planned strategy. So I channeled my rage into something more productive, a methodical investigation that would document every lie they'd told me. I started by creating a detailed timeline of their deception, cross-referencing their claims with publicly available records. The lawsuit Dad had mentioned was completely fabricated. I searched court databases, legal news websites, and even contacted his firm directly under the pretense of being a potential client. Not only was there no pending litigation, but the firm had just been featured in a local business journal for their record-breaking year of profits. Mom's business struggles were equally fictional. Her interior design company had actually landed several major contracts in the past 6 months, including a complete renovation of a luxury hotel downtown. Her social media accounts showed a steady stream of satisfied clients and finished projects. She'd even won an award from the local Chamber of Commerce for small business excellence, just 2 months after claiming she might have to shut down. The financial records were the most damning evidence. Using my connections in the marketing world, I was able to access credit monitoring services and public financial databases that revealed the true state of their finances. Not only were they not struggling, but they were actually wealthier than they'd ever been. They'd made significant investments, increased their retirement contributions, and even opened new high-yield savings accounts. The home equity loan was particularly infuriating. They'd borrowed $200,000 against their house's value immediately after receiving my inheritance money, essentially double-dipping on the same assets. They'd used my emotional generosity to secure one pot of money while simultaneously leveraging their property to access even more capital. I also discovered they'd been planning this for much longer than I'd realized. Looking through old emails and text messages, I found conversations between them from more than a year ago discussing Rebecca's situation and how to handle the inheritance issue. They'd been plotting to steal from me since before Nana had even passed away. But the most personally devastating evidence came from their private communications, which I accessed through a combination of detective work and some questionable but legal methods. They'd been laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me, calling me gullible and naive in messages to each other. One text from Dad to Mom read, "She's so desperate to please us, she'll believe anything we tell her. This is going to be easier than we thought." Another message from Mom was even worse. "Sometimes I think we spoiled her too much. She has no backbone at all. At least her weakness is profitable for us." Reading those messages felt like being stabbed in the heart. These people had raised me, claimed to love me unconditionally, and spent decades building my trust, only to exploit it in the cruelest way possible. They saw my love for them as a weakness to be exploited, rather than a gift to be treasured. But their arrogance was about to become their downfall. They'd been so confident in their manipulation skills that they'd left a digital trail of evidence that would be impossible to deny. Every lie, every false claim, every moment of calculated emotional abuse was documented somewhere. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file: financial records, communication, screenshots, timeline documentation, and witness statements from people who could verify the real state of their businesses. I also consulted with a lawyer about my options for recovering the stolen inheritance money. The lawyer was amazed by the thoroughness of their deception and confirmed that what they'd done constituted fraud on multiple levels. The fake loan documents, the false financial claims, and the deliberate misrepresentation of their circumstances created a strong legal case for both civil and potentially criminal charges. But before I involved law enforcement, I wanted to give them one chance to come clean and return my money voluntarily. I was about to confront them with all the evidence I'd gathered, expecting them to be ashamed and apologetic once they realized I'd uncovered their lies. I had no idea they were about to escalate their betrayal to a level I never could have imagined. The investigation also revealed the extent of their financial crimes beyond just my case. They'd been systematically defrauding other family members for years, using similar emotional manipulation tactics to extract money from elderly relatives and financially vulnerable cousins. My inheritance theft was just the latest and largest in a long series of family cons they'd been running. I found evidence of forged documents, fake emergency scenarios, and elaborate sob stories they'd used on multiple victims. They'd stolen from my great-aunt's medical fund, manipulated my cousin into loaning them money for fake legal troubles, and even convinced my elderly grandfather to sign over power of attorney during a supposed financial crisis that never existed. The pattern was always the same. Identify a family member with money or financial vulnerability, create a fake crisis that required immediate financial assistance, use emotional manipulation and family guilt to extract the money, then disappear or make excuses when repayment was due. They'd been running these schemes for at least 5 years, possibly longer. What made it worse was realizing how they'd positioned themselves as the responsible, successful members of the family, while secretly preying on everyone else's generosity and trust. They'd built their entire lifestyle on stolen money from their own relatives, all while maintaining the facade of being loving, supportive family members. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and absolutely damning. I had everything I needed to destroy them legally and financially. All that remained was deciding how to use it. I decided to confront them during what I thought would be a normal family dinner in late May. I drove down from Boston with my evidence folder, planning to present them with everything I'd discovered and give them a chance to explain themselves before taking legal action. I was nervous but determined to handle this maturely, hoping against hope that there might be some explanation that would salvage our relationship. The moment I walked into their house, I knew something was different. They seemed unusually tense, avoiding eye contact and speaking in short, clipped sentences. Mom barely hugged me hello, and Dad was fidgeting with his phone constantly throughout dinner. I tried to bring up the subject of loan repayment, casually mentioning that I was ready to start house hunting and would need the money back soon. That's when they dropped the bombshell that would make their previous betrayal seem almost minor in comparison. "Actually, Rebecca, we need to talk to you about something important," Dad said, his voice taking on a cold, businesslike tone I'd never heard before. "We've been discussing your behavior lately, and we're concerned about some patterns we've noticed." Mom nodded gravely. "You've been asking a lot of questions about our finances, showing up unexpectedly and frankly acting paranoid and suspicious. It's making us very uncomfortable." I was stunned. "Paranoid? I've been wondering about the loan repayment timeline we agreed on." "That's completely reasonable. That's exactly what we're talking about," Dad continued. "This obsession with money is unhealthy. We're starting to think that inheritance changed you in ways we didn't expect. You're not the daughter we raised." What happened next still takes my breath away. They told me they'd decided I needed space to work on myself and that they were cutting contact with me indefinitely. They claimed my questions about their finances proved I'd become greedy and materialistic, that I was harassing them about money instead of trusting their judgment about the loan timeline. "We think it's best if you don't contact us for a while," Mom said, tears streaming down her face in what I now realize was a completely fake display of emotion. "Maybe this time apart will help you remember what family really means." I tried to show them the evidence I'd gathered to explain that I knew about their lies and deception, but they refused to look at anything I'd brought. They claimed my investigation proved how far I'd fallen from the values they'd taught me. When I mentioned the home equity loan and their luxury purchases, they acted like I was stalking them and invading their privacy. The conversation ended with them asking me to leave their house immediately. As I drove away in shock, I received that devastating text message in our family group chat. "We need space from you. Don't contact us again." They'd even removed me from the chat immediately after sending it. I was devastated, confused, and completely isolated. They'd not only stolen my inheritance but had somehow managed to frame me as the villain in the situation. For several days, I actually wondered if I was going crazy, if maybe I had become obsessed with money and lost sight of what was important. But then my anger kicked in, and I realized this was just another layer of their manipulation. They'd stolen from me, gotten caught, and instead of admitting their wrongdoing, they'd decided to cut me off completely to avoid accountability. They probably thought I'd just give up and let them keep the money rather than pursue legal action against my own parents. They were wrong. I took all my evidence to the police and filed fraud charges against them. I also initiated a civil lawsuit to recover my inheritance money with interest and damages. The lawyer I'd consulted was eager to take the case because the evidence was so overwhelming and the story was so egregious. What happened next was the most satisfying example of karma I've ever witnessed. The police investigation revealed that their scheme was even more elaborate than I'd discovered. They'd been planning this for over 2 years, since before Nana had even updated her will. They'd actually tried to convince her to change the inheritance to them instead of me, but Nana had refused and told them she wanted me to have financial independence. The investigation also uncovered that this wasn't their first fraud scheme. They'd been running similar cons on other family members for years, taking advantage of elderly relatives and manipulating other people's generosity. My case opened the floodgates for multiple victims to come forward with their own stories of financial abuse. Within 6 months, both my parents were facing serious criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Their assets were frozen pending the investigation, including the house they'd been so proud of. Dad's investment firm fired him immediately when the charges became public, and Mom's interior design business collapsed when clients learned about her legal troubles. The best part, the home equity loan they'd taken out came due right in the middle of their legal troubles, and with their assets frozen, they couldn't make the payments. The bank foreclosed on their house and they lost everything they'd tried so hard to steal and hoard. I recovered my full inheritance plus damages, legal fees, and interest. More importantly, I learned that Nana had actually suspected something like this might happen. She'd included a provision in her will that if anyone tried to coerce or defraud me out of the inheritance, they would be permanently excluded from any future family trusts or estates. They're both serving time now, and I've built a beautiful life for myself using the inheritance exactly as Nana intended. I bought a gorgeous condo in Boston, started my own marketing consultancy, and found a chosen family of friends who actually care about me, rather than what they can get from me. The whole experience taught me that blood doesn't automatically create loyalty, and that the people who claim to love you the most are sometimes the ones most willing to betray you. But it also showed me that justice does exist, even when it takes time to arrive. The legal proceedings revealed even more shocking details about their criminal enterprise. They'd been using sophisticated financial software to track family members' assets and income, creating detailed profiles of potential victims. They'd even hired a private investigator to gather information about relatives' financial situations, all to identify the best targets for their fraud schemes. The sentencing hearing was surreal. Watching my own parents in orange jumpsuits, listening to the judge describe their crimes, seeing other family members testify about their own victimization, it felt like watching a movie about someone else's life. But when the judge handed down their sentences, 3 years each for fraud and conspiracy, I felt a sense of closure I never expected. The civil lawsuit resulted in a judgment that exceeded my wildest hopes. Not only did I recover my stolen inheritance, but the court awarded additional damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages designed to deter similar behavior. The total amount was nearly double what they'd stolen from me. Most satisfying of all was learning that their perfect suburban lifestyle had been entirely built on stolen money. The house, the cars, the club memberships, the luxury vacations, all of it had been funded by defrauding their own family members. When everything was sold to pay restitution to their victims, they were left with nothing but their prison sentences, and the knowledge that their greed had cost them everything. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you? How did you handle discovering that family members weren't who you thought they were? Share your stories in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences helps more than we realize. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and justice stories. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that karma is real, and that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up facing exactly the consequences they deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and for being part of this community where we can share these difficult experiences without judgment. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, and you have every right to protect yourself from people who would exploit your love and generosity. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that standing up for yourself makes you the villain. Life has a way of revealing people's true nature, and justice has a way of finding those who think they're above consequences.